Hello my family, welcome to Quick Summary. In episode 9, it is the day of Logan's funeral, but nationally, it's also a huge news day. ATM is under scrutiny for what they did. A lot of people are really pissed off that ATM was the first one to announce Jared Mackin was president because the votes haven't been counted. The situation in Wisconsin is huge, so Mackin is only president to the ATM crowd. Nationally, it's up for grabs still. There's likely to be deep litigation regarding who actually becomes president. It's a hot-button issue, and it's one that's leading to a lot of protests and a few riots around the street. But people like Mattson have to prepare for the likelihood that Jared Mackin becomes president. So he calls up Shiv before she heads off to the church. He wants to know what she's thinking, and she tells him this is the perfect day to drop your situation regarding the faulty numbers. It's a news dump. Everyone's focused on the election. No one will be concerned with the fact that you were lying about your subscribers. Mattson's gonna get Emma to drop these numbers, but he's also concerned with what happens with Jared Mackin if Mackin blocks the deal. It's all for nothing and Shiv doesn't seem all that concerned. She though is getting prepared for her father's funeral and she, along with Roman and Kendall, are all gonna be heading over together. Kendall's the last one though to get in the car on his way over to meet his brother and sister. He got a phone call from Raba. She was supposed to go to the funeral along with their children, but she's going upstate. She no longer feels safe. When Kendall hears this, he gets so incensed that he makes a beeline over to where Raba is located and demands that she bring the kids to their grandfather's funeral. But Raba steadfast that she's just not gonna do it. Sophie doesn't even want to go. She doesn't feel safe, and they don't want to be put in a situation where something could happen. It doesn't help the fact that Kendall is going through a lot emotionally. He's pretty frazzled. The dude is just on edge. So when he finally does meet up with Roman and Shiv, he's kind of going through it a little bit. Shiv can tell, and she asks Kendall what's wrong. And he explains that Raba isn't bringing the kids to the funeral, and everybody in the car thinks that's pretty messed up. There's a little lull in the conversation. So this is the time where Shiv decides to tell her brothers that she's pregnant. It comes as a pretty big surprise to both of them, but she felt like she had to tell them because their mother is gonna be at the funeral and she's gonna tell her. So she might as well tell her brothers. A couple minutes later, they arrive at the church and the first thing that Kendall does when he gets out is grab his assistant and tell her, "Hey, I want to meet with family lawyers. I want custody." He starts looking on his calendar and he sees a meeting that was scheduled by Jess, and he doesn't remember putting that on there. Of course, it was put on by her. So he says, "What's up with this?" And she doesn't want to discuss it that day because it's the day of his dad's funeral. But he kind of forces her to, and she says, "Look, you've always been really supportive of me and I do appreciate that, but I think it's time I move on. I just need more." And at first he is supportive. He says, "Yeah, that totally understandable." But he does ask if it's about Mackin, and she says she's been thinking about it for quite some time, and then all of a sudden he turns. He calls her stupid. He calls all of it stupid. He says that she's making a horrible mistake and he makes a beeline for the church. Before he actually enters though, Hugo grabs him to let him know about the Gojo story that dropped regarding the faulty subscriber numbers. He just wants to keep Kendall up to date. He then heads into the church that is packed with a bunch of big names. Jared Mackin is making an appearance. So is Lucas Mattson. And then everybody from Way Stars, so the Carls, the Jerrys, the Franks, and then in the front row you have the women of Logan Roy. You've got the kid's mom. You've got the woman who he cheated on her with. Then you've got Marcia and then Carrie right next to her. Now, normally Carrie would be shunned out by Marcia just like she was when Logan first passed away. But Marcia's actually pretty nice to her. She consoles her because she can tell that Carrie is going through a lot. She's not really dealing with it well. The kids have a little bit of time before the casket actually shows up, and they all kind of go into business mode. Roman asked Kendall, "Who have you talked to? Because I think we still need to get the board wrapped around our ideas and Kendall hasn't talked to anybody." Roman though decides to. He walks up to Frank, because he wants to make a play for this thing. He tells Frank that Kendall is kind of emotionally out of it. Mackin will block the deal and he kind of needs to get a team together, but he can tell by Frank's face that that team will not include Frank. He walks back over to the area where Shiv and Kendall are because their mom is showing up and right away their mom can tell that Shiv is pregnant. It's like a sixth sense. Shiv, though, excuses herself when she notices that Mattson's shown up. She asked how the story is being perceived and so far they haven't gotten any blowback. It's just like Shiv predicted. She then pulls Mattson aside and suggests an idea on how to get around this whole Mackin situation. If he's gonna get hung up on regulatory, Shiv suggests that Mattson have a US CEO. That way there is no regulatory issue. It's not a foreigner taking over a US media company. It's run by an American citizen and she suggested that American citizen be her. Mattson appears to be in agreement with the idea, but further discussion is cut short as the casket arrives and the funeral commences. As the time for speeches approaches, Logan's brother, who is also Greg's grandfather, steps forward despite Greg being explicitly instructed not to allow him to speak. There's no way that this guy wasn't speaking at his brother's funeral. What the kids were worried about was Ewan was gonna say something that might be a little controversial, might tank the stock price. And at first that doesn't seem to be the issue. Ewan tells a nice story about when they were kids coming over to the country, but then he gets into the whole, hey, my brother was a piece of crap. And it gets a little awkward. Next up to speak is Roman, and Roman had to been practicing this. He thought this would be his big moment, but he chokes. I mean, he gets up there and he cannot do it. He starts bawling his eyes out to his brother and sister that he just can't. He has to sit down, and it puts Kendall in an uncomfortable position because Kendall wasn't planning on speaking, but he's thrust into the spotlight and he actually shines. He does a great job. The final speaker is Shiv, and she really doesn't know what to say. She also wasn't planning on speaking, but when Roman kind of crapped the bed, it forced her to get up there. And it's uncomfortable because you have to say nice things about a guy that wasn't all that nice. But she perseveres, she gets through it, and everybody then starts making their way out of the church as they're doing. So Kendall is there to thank everybody for coming, and when Megan walks by, he tells Kendall, you did a great job, and they agree to talk later. Hugo then walks up because he's learned that Shiv has floated to Mattson the idea of a US CEO, and that would screw up their whole plan. After the ceremony, as everyone makes their way to the mausoleum, the designated location for Logan Roy's resting place, Kendall seizes a moment to pull Hugo aside while they are walking back to their cars. Kendall confides in Hugo, expressing his desire for Hugo to inform the press that the family's support for Mattson's takeover is waning. He wants Hugo to make it sound like Mattson is trying to steal the company for a song, and the board is also questioning it. He then admits to Hugo that this is an explicit plan to mess up the deal with him ending up on top and no one else, just him alone. He wants Hugo to come with him and he invites him, and he does say, this won't be me and you. You will be my bitch, but you will be paid handsomely. We're talking millions of dollars, and Hugo is on board with that idea. Everybody then heads to the scene. Regis, because what is a funeral without a hit after party now with Hugo in his pocket, he goes after his dad's old security guard, Colin. He tells him that he wants him to work for him, and Colin seems to be on board. Kendall then notices that Mencken has shown up at this after party, and he finally has a chance to talk to him. He congratulates him on what he feels like will be a formality, Mencken ending up in the presidency. But he does ask, when are you going to make an official comment on regulations? We're kind of waiting for that, and Mencken doesn't exactly give Kendall a vote of confidence when he says, well, I'm going to do my best, because according to Roman, this was a done deal. It wasn't Mencken doing his best, it was Mencken getting it done. So this is a little troubling. He barely has any time to delve deeper into the matter as the conversation gets abruptly interrupted by Cousin Greg. He approaches Mencken and introduces himself as one of the guys from ATN who played a crucial role in making it all possible. Meanwhile, Greg also takes the opportunity to highlight Tom's accomplishments, mentioning that he is currently occupied at the ATN office. Next thing you know, Roman comes over, and then finally Connor comes over. Mencken is ironically saved by Shiv, who comes over and grabs Em and says, hey, let's go talk to Lucas Mattson. She brings Em over, and Mattson and Shiv are able to make their pitch to Mencken. And it's no secret that Shiv doesn't really like Mencken. But as she tells, both men are viewers like Jared Mencken, and I respect the opinion of our viewers. Now, whether or not Mencken will accept the idea of a US-based CEO in the Gojo acquisition, that is still a big question. A couple hours later, though, Mencken leaves, Mattson leaves, but Tom finally shows up. He got 20 minutes away from the offices at a TN to make an appearance. He makes a beeline for Shiv, and he starts questioning why it took her so long to reveal to him that she was pregnant, and she tells him that she couldn't really find a good time to do it. They start kind of getting into their normal Tom and Skiff banter, but then Tom kind of breaks down, not as aggressively as Roman did earlier, but he feels guilty. He was really close to Logan, and he didn't make an appearance at the funeral because he was just too busy at a TN, and he feels bad about it. And Shiv can tell that. Tom's kind of going through it as well. She tells him, go back to our apartment, get some sleep, get some rest. Shiv's cell phone then rings, and it's Mattson because he's gotten word that Mencken would be open to a US-based CEO. And this is great news for Team Shiv and Team Mattson. So Shiv is over in the corner, smiling ear to ear. Her brothers meanwhile are in another corner, planning against her. Kendall walks over to Roman and says, look man, I'm hearing that Mencken might be open to allowing Mattson's deal to go through if there's a US-based CEO. Roman is floored by this. He doesn't think that's remotely possible. He thinks that they have Mencken by the balls, but Kendall says, we don't, man. We don't have him by the balls. He has us by the balls. And it was you who screwed this whole thing up. And I don't blame you. I blame myself because I should have seen it coming and I should have put a stop to it. But you screwed this thing up, and now we have to clean it up. If we don't want to lose Waystar, we're gonna have to get real and fight Shiv with the board. Kendall then pats Roman on the head and tells him, I've got a plan. You screwed it up, but it'll be alright. But hearing that he's the one who might have screwed up this whole thing the day that they said goodbye to their dad is just too much for Roman. He needs to let out some aggression, so he walks out of that hotel and walks into the streets where people are protesting, but instead of joining them, he starts cursing them out. I mean, it's one versus a mob, and it doesn't take too long before Roman Roy ends up on the ground in the fetal position because cursing out a mob and telling them that they're idiots is a really good way to get punched in the face. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.